Remove this hazard or we'll fine you $400 a day.
That's your last warning,
said Noreen Volstrick, president of the Felmoran Shores HOA, as she stood on the bank like she owned the lake. Her sunglasses never moved. Her yacht, still idling 20 feet offshore, was dripping splinters of my bridge into the water. That bridge had stood for 16 years. It took Seraphil, her 38-foot imported yacht, exactly 6 seconds to gut it from below. It was obstructing navigational flow, she added, smug. The vote was unanimous. I didn't blink. This reservoir, I helped design it. That bridge was grandfathered in before the board even existed. I stepped toward her and pointed at the gouge line across the hull. And that damage? You're not billing me for that either. Subscribe now if you've ever had to fight someone who thought a luxury boat gave them power. Because this war, this one's personal. My name is Thorne Ellerick. I'm a retired federal infrastructure analyst. I spent 20 years working for the Bureau of Reclamation, building models for water flow and dam safety across 3 western states. When I retired, I moved here, to this cabin on the east side of Felmoran Lake. Because my wife chose this spot from the hospital bed, she never left again. I built that bridge with her name carved into it, Sarah Spahn. We didn't have children. That bridge was ours, our project, our piece. The last place her hands held mine. And this morning, Noreen's vanity project ran over it like it was driftwood. She didn't apologize. She didn't stop. Instead, she marched up with her clipboard and handed me a printed violation. Official letterhead, fake smile, all of it. Unauthorized overwater construction, it read. Unsafe structure. Her voice dripped with performative sympathy as she said, I understand your loss, Mr. Ellerick, but continuity standards are in place for a reason. Continuity, that's what she called it. She's been president of the board for 11 months. In that time, she's built 12 luxury vacation homes, converted the Southern Trail into a private members lounge, and bought herself that yacht, all while parading around this HOA like it's her private LLC. But here's what she doesn't know. See the eastern dam outlet, the backup sluice system built into the base of Felmoran's original flow design? That's mine. I hold the easement. It was deeded to me when I sold the slope data and outflow model back in '97. I still have the permit. I still have the key. And it still works. That lake feeds her floating docks, her rental properties, her imported fish spas. It keeps the Azure Crown Resort afloat, literally. And right now, her yacht's rudder is tangled in water lilies my wife planted by hand. That's why this isn't about money. It's not about rules. It's about erasure. The kind of quiet erasure bureaucrats do when they smile through it. The kind that pretends a person's grief can be redacted by ink. I didn't just lose a bridge. Today. I lost the one place I could still hear her voice when the lake was quiet. And when you take that from a man who's already buried the only thing that made this place feel like home, you don't get to walk away untouched. I looked down at the violation in my hand, creased, damp, still warm from her printer, then back at the crumpled wood in the lake. This wasn't a mistake, it was war. The morning after the crash felt like waking inside someone else's nightmare. Fog crawled low across Felmoran Lake, swallowing the last fragments of Sarah's span like it couldn't stomach what happened either. I stepped onto my porch, boots still damp from yesterday's wreckage, and found an envelope wedged under a river stone on my steps, sharp white against the cedar wood. Not a knock, not a word, just the envelope, the HOA logo, and Noreen's handwriting angled like she carved the letters with a blade. Notice of non-compliance. Of course. I tore it open, expecting one violation, maybe 2. Instead, it was a stack, 8 pages thick. They claim my dock light was non-standard, my shoreline reads invasive, my mailbox structurally inconsistent, and my property fence improperly measured according to the revised boundary definitions. Every line was a hit, aimed straight at the life I built on this shoreline. They didn't even wait 24 hours after destroying my bridge. That's how you know something isn't just enforcement, it's retaliation. I scanned the list, feeling heat crawl up my spine. These weren't even real complaints. Half the items referenced rules that didn't exist when I moved here. The rest were so vague a stiff breeze could trigger them. And buried halfway down, circled in red ink like a joke. Immediate removal required. Unapproved overwater structure. Sarah's span, listed as an unapproved structure. as if it hadn't been here longer than every single short-term rental Noreen pushed through, longer than her yacht, longer than her tenure, longer than her entire manufactured Azure Crown Vision plan. I stood on my porch with the packet in hand when a golf cart rolled up, humming like a smug little insect. Behind the wheel sat Everett Crane, the HOA's so-called compliance officer, his neon vest tucked into his belt like a badge. He didn't bother to meet my eyes. He just reached for a tablet, clicked something, and said, "These fines will start today." "Fines for what?" I asked. He shrugged. "Everything listed. I'm just documenting." He wasn't just documenting. He was collecting ammunition. "Did Noreen tell you to deliver this?" His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to catch the truth hiding under the silence. He didn't answer. Instead, he lifted his camera and started taking pictures. My fence, the steps to the porch, the siding. Click, click, click. He zoomed in on a single water lily, uprooted by yesterday's impact, as if nature itself violated Section 14B. I stepped down from the porch. "Everett, stop." He didn't. Just kept clicking. "You know that bridge was approved," I said. "You know it predates the board." Still no answer. He moved toward the shoreline, angling his camera over the water. The remains of the bridge floated in scattered pieces, sanded cedar, hand-cut joints, the curved centerpiece where my wife carved our initials. Everett documented it like a crime scene. Like I was the one who harmed something. I knew better than to argue. People like Everett don't enforce rules, they hide behind them. And people like Noreen manipulate them until everyone forgets what the rules were supposed to protect in the first place. He uploaded the photos, marked the violations as verified, then drove off with a stiff nod that felt more like a warning. The neighborhood was waking now, porch lights flicking on, blinds twitching, joggers pausing mid-stride to watch the tension unfold. Some gave apologetic glances. Most didn't meet my eyes. Alder Point Shores used to be a quiet place. Retirees, families, people who wanted the lake, not the spotlight. But ever since Noreen's development boom, every home became a commodity, every resident a liability. And me? I became an obstacle. I folded the packet and walked toward the water's edge. The lake mirrored the gray sky, calm but deceptive. Below the surface, currents shifted, reshaped by the illegal pumps Noreen buried beneath her expanded docks. I'd mapped this reservoir more times than I'd mapped my own handwriting. I knew what healthy water looked like. This wasn't it. A ripple near the fallen arch caught my eye. Algae, thicker than it should have been for this season. A warning sign most people would miss. But I'd spent decades tracking water flow failures caused by small, invisible choices. Bad pumps, ignored permits, shortcuts that turn into catastrophes. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just her yacht destroying a memorial. This wasn't just HOA retaliation. The lake itself was changing under her hand, quietly, illegally, expensively. And unlike everyone else here, I knew exactly how lakes respond to pressure, physical, chemical, political. You push the system out of balance long enough, it doesn't give you a warning tap. It collapses. I looked down at the broken curve of Sarah's span, drifting by my boots, the wood darkened by water, but still unmistakably hers. I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not grief, certainty. Noreen didn't just pick a fight with a widower. She picked a fight with the only man in this neighborhood who understood exactly how to dismantle everything she built without touching a single one of her walls. I saw him before he saw me, Draven Mott, standing near the HOA's utility cart at the far end of the access trail, shoulders squared like he'd practiced how to hold them in front of a mirror. The yellow compliance folder in his hands looked too clean for someone dealing with lakefront damage, but that was the thing about Draven. He always looked clean, like the mess never quite reached him. He hesitated when he noticed me approaching. Not fear, not guilt, something in between. A flicker of discomfort in the way his thumb tapped the folder's edge. "You here to add another violation?" I asked. "No," he said quickly, voice tight. "Just doing my rounds." I stopped a few feet short. "Funny how your rounds start right after the bridge came down." He glanced over my shoulder toward the lake, then dropped his eyes. I saw the footage. That got my attention. "What footage?" He cleared his throat. Noreen had the drone operator recording the community marina showcase from her deck. The yacht cam caught the moment it struck the bridge. She had the footage locked right after the impact, claimed it was corrupted. But the HOA server syncs automatically every 24 hours. I saw the file before it updated. I took a step closer. Did you download it? He shook his head. I can't. Only board officers have external export rights. Then quieter. She knows that. He wasn't just uneasy. He was trapped. I could see it in how he kept glancing toward the trail, like someone might appear to collect his loyalty if he stood too long in the wrong place. Draven wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't a good one either. He was a guy who played it safe. Paperwork, protocol, policy. He liked lines and boxes and processes. People like Noreen, they write around the lines. People like me, we know how to erase them entirely. So why are you here? I asked, folding my arms. He hesitated again, then held out the folder. I didn't take it, not yet. She's citing you for encroachment and aesthetic inconsistency. But the shoreline data she referenced, it doesn't match the revised plat maps. You're still within your original bounds. And the bridge? What about it? Draven looked up then. Really looked. The bridge is listed in the County Ecological Preservation Ledger. It was filed under the Shoreline Harmony Clause in 04, the same clause she used to greenlight her synthetic beach lounge. Now I took the folder. She cited you with a clause that protects you. He nodded, expression unreadable. I thought you should know. The folder wasn't the full violation list. It was something else. Printouts of lake survey overlays, old architectural memos, and a scanned PDF labeled Alaric Easement, East Sluice Lock, 1997. My signature was on the last page, dated, stamped. I hadn't seen that document in years. You pulled this from HOA records? I asked. No, he said. County archives. HOA server doesn't show your easement at all. Someone deleted the reference tag 3 years ago during the digital migration. Noreen oversaw that process. That flicker. In his eyes again, he hadn't known that last part when he started digging, but he knew it now, and it was eating at him. Why tell me? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, because it's not about a bridge anymore, is it? We stood in silence as the wind rolled across the water, pushing the remains of Sarah's span toward the shallows like they were trying to come home. Draven turned to leave. You ever see the lower lake levels during a controlled outflow? I asked, voice quiet. He paused. No, he said. Only saw pictures. They're ugly, but they're honest. He didn't say anything, just nodded once, then walked away down the trail. I tucked the folder under my arm and turned back toward the water. For the first time since the crash, I wasn't staring at debris. I was staring at leverage. The problem with people like Noreen Volstrick is they assume money erases scrutiny. They build fast, cut corners faster, and count on the neighborhood being too polite or too tired to notice. But I'd spent 20 years auditing water infrastructure for federal contracts. I made a career out of noticing what people were paid to ignore. That morning, I took the canoe out. Not the fiberglass one tourists used to borrow from the rental shed, but my wife's, the long ashwood frame she insisted on learning to varnish by hand. The lake was glassy, still half shadowed by the ridge. I stayed near the surface, paddling slow, low, quiet, hugging the eastern curve of the shoreline, where the original survey line still matched the real water line. 10 minutes in, I reached her side of the lake, Noreen's side. What used to be public shoreline was now transformed into a private dock system, with bleached pine planks and floating LED lanterns strung like ornaments across the inlet. The old nature trail was gone, paved over with imported stone. What replaced it wasn't a marina. It was a resort wearing a residential HOA badge. She called it the Azure Crown. 12 modular units floated on individual platforms with aluminum supports that reached down into the lake bed. Some of them hadn't even been there a week ago. You could still see the new weld marks, raw and shiny under the waterline. That's when I saw it. A wide PVC conduit running beneath the decking, low to the water, snaking from the generator, housing toward the lake itself. Half submerged, unsanctioned. I eased the canoe closer. The conduit disappeared into a small platform labeled Jet Fill Pump Station, B2. No HOA permit markers, no reflective hazard tags, nothing. Just a high-volume siphon feed jammed into the lake and pulling water through a commercial-grade filter box. This wasn't a minor violation. This was illegal water extraction, designed to fill artificial pools, cooling systems, maybe even waste flush. Whatever it was doing, it was draining at scale, and based on how low the northwestern shore had dipped in the last week, I'd bet money it wasn't their only one. I reached into the water and dipped a test strip from the pack I always carried. The nitrates spiked past baseline, microbeads too. Something synthetic was leaching back in, cosmetic runoff most likely. Whatever this resort was hiding, it wasn't just drawing water, it was sending poison back. As I paddled back, I watched a guest in a robe sip wine under a sunshade, feet dangling over the lake, unaware they were floating over a makeshift drain that would never pass environmental review, not if the state ever saw it. Back home, I laid the strip on the porch railing. The chemical markings bloomed angry and orange. Sarah's lilies had started turning pale last season. I'd thought it was just aging plants, but maybe not. That night, I reviewed the original hydraulic model I designed for Felmoran when it was still state supervised. It showed precisely how outflow delay at high temperatures could cause stagnation pockets near the southern inlet. That's where her pump was, and that's where the fish had stopped spawning last spring. I checked the flow meter numbers again. 2 inches drop in 9 days. The HOA wouldn't track it, but I did. Daily, logged, calibrated against shoreline markers I carved into granite long before Noreen learned how to fake a permit signature. She thought the lake was ornamental. She didn't understand that lakes are alive. And this one was starting to choke. I closed the model and turned off the monitor. The folder Draven gave me sat nearby, still open to the easement deed. My name, my seal, my key. Tomorrow, I'd call the County Water Oversight Division, not to complain, just to ask a few questions about the last time Felmoran was evaluated for backflow risk in unauthorized outtake. Once they ran the report, once they saw the unauthorized pumping systems, her insurance wouldn't cover a single plank of that resort, and neither would the HOAs. The call to the County Water Oversight Division didn't last more than 7 minutes. I kept it simple, professional, just a courtesy inquiry from a retired engineer with historical ties to the reservoir. When I mentioned the backflow signatures I detected near the southern inlet, the tone on the other end shifted. The woman paused, asked me to repeat the pump location, then asked casually if I had reason to believe there was unregistered extraction occurring. "I'm not making an accusation," I said, "but if someone were operating siphon systems from floating platforms, they'd need separate authorization from the Department of Environmental Quality, right?" She confirmed they would, especially if the water was being repurposed for private amenities, especially if it entered or exited any form of filtration system. She took my contact information, said she'd flag it internally for a site inspection queue. I could tell what that meant, slow-walked unless prompted. But I didn't need them to act now, I just needed the flag to exist. Once the paperwork cycle started, it would become public domain, and once public, so would the violations. I hung up and turned back to the old dam schematics. The eastern sluice line hadn't been used in over a decade, but it was built for emergency drawdown, small-scale water level control that bypassed the newer mechanized gates downstream. Unlike the main gates, the eastern channel was manual, simple, clean, and best of all, it was mine. I still had the easement, and I still had the iron key. The county had even sent me a courtesy maintenance letter 2 years ago, reminding me that holders of legacy dam rights must ensure routine inspection access is maintained. That was all the legal oxygen I needed. I drove out to the dam access trail later that afternoon. The service road was barely passable, just ruts and gravel worn down by years of disuse. A padlocked gate greeted me at the trailhead, but I had the old bolt cutter in the truck bed, just in case the HOA had tried to chain it shut again. They had. One clean snap, and I was through. The outflow housing was where I left it. Steel panel, rusting bolts, and a concrete hatch cover barely visible beneath overgrowth. I crouched down and cleared the debris, brushing my fingers over the carved brass plate embedded into the side. Property access, Thorn Ellerick. Easement, 27B, code 91741. I ran my thumb across it, still legible, still mine. The hatch lifted easier than I expected. Below it, the narrow vertical shaft descended 10 feet into cool, dark silence. I lowered myself carefully, boots echoing on metal rungs until I reached the floor. There, nestled against the back wall, sat the old flow valve, a 2-foot wheel connected to the eastern discharge pipe. I checked the fittings. Clean. The air smelled sharp, metallic, but dry. No one had tampered with it, and no one could activate it but me. I didn't turn it, not yet. Timing mattered. If I did it now, Noreen would cry sabotage. But if the county flagged her operation and the algae bloom continued, she'd be exposed from both sides: insurance, HOA compliance, and environmental risk. All I had to do was let the water speak louder than her lies. I climbed back up and replaced the hatch, relocked the gate, took photos of every step, time-stamped, geotagged, and uploaded to a private drive. I was building a record, methodical, silent, indisputable. By the time I got back to the house, my inbox had a new message: unfamiliar sender. Subject line: RE board meeting prep, Elaric Sluice rights. I opened it. Draven. The body was short. 2 sentences. Noreen asked if your easement was still valid. I didn't answer. She's digging. Be careful. She was starting to realize I wasn't just holding a grudge. I was holding the switch to the one thing she couldn't build overnight, couldn't bribe into submission, and couldn't sue out of existence. 3 days later, I woke to the sound of engines, not lawnmowers or HOA golf carts, diesel growls, hydraulic lift arms, construction crew. I stepped onto my porch just in time to see a barge crane drifting toward the south dock of the Azure Crown. A dozen workers unloaded rebar, insulation panels, and plastic tanks wrapped in blue tarp. More expansion. She wasn't slowing down. She was doubling down. I grabbed my binoculars. From the angle of the platform pilings and the spacing of the tanks, I could tell exactly what she was building: closed-circuit water cooling units, the kind used in modular hot spring systems. Meaning, she wasn't just extracting water. She was recirculating it, heating it, then dumping it back. That's not just a violation. That's hazardous discharge. She was transforming Fellmoran Lake into her personal thermal spa, without permits, without oversight, and without any regard for the native ecosystem. Every guest who stepped into those glitter-lit soaking tubs was accelerating a system crash she didn't understand. I climbed down from the porch and walked the slope to the lily shore. The water smelled different now, sharp, oily. One of Sarah's oldest blooms had begun to wilt, browned at the edge, puckered in the center. I knelt beside it and touched the stalk. It bent too easily, hollowed. That's when I knew the line had been crossed. This wasn't just about a bridge anymore. It wasn't even about the lake. It was about whether anything planted in love could survive a world ruled by shortcuts. I looked up, across the water, toward the crane, and I knew what had to happen. That night, I pulled out the key. It had been locked in my desk drawer, wrapped in a faded utility map, and taped shut with a note written in my own hand. Only if the balance breaks. The balance was broken. Before sunrise, I hiked back to the dam. This time, I didn't hesitate. I unlocked the hatch, climbed down, and stood before the wheel. I remembered every measurement, every stress test, every depth calculation. The system was built to allow for a slow, graduated outflow, enough to lower the lake steadily over 2 to 3 days without triggering structural alerts. I opened the valve one notch. The pipe moaned. Pressure shifted. A gust of stale air pushed past my boots. I turned it again. Another notch. The sound deepened, a rumble that moved through the chamber like an old animal waking from a long sleep. I waited, watched the gauges on the panel, still functioning, still mine. The flow began, measured, silent, unstoppable. By noon, the first waterline markers began to show. The guests wouldn't notice, not yet. But the algae would, the fish would, and her pipes would. That evening, I walked the Eastern Trail, past the cove where kids used to fish before the resort was built. A pair of teenagers stood near the dock, looking confused. Their paddle boat sat on dry mud now, the water too low for launch. I kept walking. Near the inlet, I spotted a maintenance crew from the resort examining their pumps. One of them was knee-deep in exposed piping, poking at a control box that now sat 2 feet above the receded surface. He shook his head. Good. Every hour, the water would drop another half-inch. By tomorrow, her pumps would begin to cavitate, suck air, seize, overheat. And when they failed, her luxury experience would turn into a plumbing nightmare. And when the inspectors arrived, when they saw unregistered discharge valves sitting above the waterline, black residue staining the rocks, and storm runoff backed up into the spa line, her resort wouldn't just lose customers, it would lose insurance. Because the moment a property's foundational system becomes uninsurable, its appraisal collapses, loans get recalled, partners panic, and HOA boards that back that kind of property, they burn with it. I didn't need to confront Noreen. I just needed to let the lake speak. Draven showed up at dusk, just after the third day of the drawdown. He didn't knock, just stood at the edge of the slope by the porch steps, hands buried in his jacket pockets, eyes fixed on the lake like he needed proof it was real. "You activated it," he said without looking at me. I didn't deny it. The waterline had dropped another 4 inches since sunrise. The southern inlet was fully exposed now. Noreen's dock footings looked like skeletal ribs reaching out from the resort's belly. Her artificial beach sloped awkwardly toward nothing. The lake, once her prized backdrop, had turned into a drying basin with secrets it could no longer hide. Draven exhaled, slow and uneven. "She's losing it." "She should." "No, I mean, she's unraveling." He pulled a folded paper from his coat and handed it over. "This is the board's internal memo she tried to sneak past the compliance review log." I unfolded it. Subject: Emergency Permit Revision. Proposal request, fast-track variance to classify the Azure Crown's modular docks and water recovery systems as temporary recreational installations. Justification: drought conditions necessitate reclassification for preservation of community assets. Signed, N. Volstrick, HOA President. She was trying to cover her tracks, retroactively. If the lake kept draining, she planned to rewrite the rules, call it all temporary, and buy herself legal insulation. "Any other board member sign this?" I asked. Draven shook his head. "Only one copy exists. I found it in the unsynced folder of her cloud account when she left her tablet open during the meeting. She doesn't know I saw it." That made him complicit now, morally and professionally. He knew it too. "She's blaming you for the drop," he added. "Said it's sabotage. I told her the board has no legal claim over the sluice or the easement." That's when she froze. "She didn't know I still held the rights? She assumed you forfeited them when the old flow model was retired." Typical. She only knew the surface of things. Pretty diagrams, talking points. But real systems don't care about headlines. They care about pressure, tolerance, and decay. "Her lawyer called the county this morning," Draven continued, "tried to file for an emergency injunction. And they told her the easement was valid, the drawdown within code, and the DEQ had already flagged her for an unscheduled pump audit. I allowed myself the smallest breath of satisfaction. "She's not going to quit," Draven said. "You know that, right?" "She doesn't have to." He looked at me, brow tight. "Then what happens?" I turned my eyes back to the lake. Systems collapse when they're overloaded, not when they're watched. Draven didn't speak again for a while. We stood together in the fading light, the sound of insects replacing the usual hum of spa filters from the other side. Then he said quietly, "I resigned this morning." I looked at him, surprised. "She told me to backdate compliance memos, said if I didn't, she'd accuse me of data breach." He swallowed. "I'm not a whistleblower. I don't like making noise. But I'm not cleaning up her lies either." I nodded once. "You did the right thing." He let out a hollow laugh. "Then why do I feel like I jumped off a cliff?" "Because it's quiet on the way down." Draven dug into his jacket again and handed me one more item, a flash drive. "What's this?" "The drone footage," he said. "From the yacht collision. She never deleted the original, just renamed it and hid it in a decoy archive. I copied it before I logged out of the system." "You sure?" "Time stamped, clear angle, shows her turning the rudder late on purpose." He paused. "I figured you'd know what to do with it." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do." He gave me a long look. "You're going to finish this, aren't you?" "I already started it," I said. As Draven turned to leave, the wind shifted, and for a moment, the lake carried the faint groan of stressed timbers across the water. Not from my side, hers. Her empire was starting to creak. I waited until just before sunrise to begin my prep. Timing mattered now. With the drone footage secure and Draven's resignation echoing through the HOA like a quiet bomb, All I needed was pressure, applied in the right place, at the right moment. I started by cataloging every piece of evidence. Footage from the yacht crash, backed up to 2 drives, time-stamped, watermarked, and burned onto a disc I sealed in a tamper-evident envelope. Water samples from the inlet, collected over the last 6 days, showing consistent chemical spikes, chlorine, sulfates, and trace glycol, likely runoff from her cooling system. That alone was enough to trigger an EPA flag. I snapped new photos of the exposed PVC siphons under Dock B2. One of them had split from its housing, heat warping visible. The water below was now thick with green film and floating plastic flakes. The low lake levels were starting to expose everything Noreen had tried to bury. Next, I drafted a single email to County DEQ Inspector Brinley Stone. Subject, active unregistered extraction, Fellmore and Shores. Attachments, drone footage, easement map, sluice drawdown, protocol, water sample logs. The tone was surgical, professional. No accusations, just facts. I laid out the sluice activation under legacy rights, highlighted the environmental shifts downstream, and gently pointed toward Noreen's ongoing resort operations. No anger, no drama. Just the slow, inevitable crawl of evidence. I set the email to send at 8:01 a.m., just after the county inbox sweep began. Then I printed the HOA charter, Section 12.5, Environmental Impact Clause. Any board-backed structure found to be in violation of county or state environmental codes is subject to immediate independent review and possible suspension of funding from HOA dues. Section 7.3, Emergency Meeting Protocol. If 25% of members sign a petition citing operational misconduct, the board must convene a public hearing within 72 hours. That would be my next step. I walked the neighborhood with printed sign-up sheets folded neatly in a clipboard. I didn't knock on every door, just the ones that mattered. Lorna Geis, widowed last year. HOA fines tripled after she repainted her shutters. Nathan and Carol Truax, young couple, 2 kids, told to move their playset to the rear of the property or face compliance penalties. The Sings, retired teachers. Their garden was sanctioned for being too dense with native vegetation. I didn't pitch them vengeance. I showed them the nitrate photos. I told them the dock pumps were unpermitted. I explained the insurance risks. I offered them a paper trail, not a war. Within 3 hours, I had 27 signatures. I scanned the sheet, time-stamped it, and emailed a copy to the HOA general inbox. Draven's resignation had already left a hole. This petition would crack it wide open. Then I called the environmental biologist I'd met years ago during a runoff mitigation project, Sarah Hinckley, now with the Regional Water Board. I left a voicemail, just a quiet message. We met in 2015 at the Sutter Dam review. I have a lake being poisoned by illegal discharge. I have water samples, a historic easement, and proof of unauthorized structural siphons. I need you to see it with your own eyes. I didn't need to convince her. I just needed her to look. By mid-afternoon, the wind picked up. The lake's exposed banks were no longer soft and rich. They were cracked and dry. Her docks creaked audibly, foam floats straining under their own weight without water to support them. I watched from the ridge as 2 men in polo shirts stood near the Azure Crown's lounge deck, gesturing toward a vertical crack in one of the new platform beams. One of them had a clipboard. The other shook his head and pulled out his phone. That's how it begins, the shift from certainty to concern, from curated luxury to structural liability. I checked my inbox again. A reply had come in from Inspector Brinley Stone. Subject RE, active unregistered extraction, Fellmore Shores. Body. Thank you for the detailed documentation. We're dispatching an inspection team tomorrow at 10 a.m. Please be available to meet on site. I sat back and let the silence wash over me. The drawdown was still underway. Her pumps were choking, her platforms were sinking, and now her legal armor was about to collapse. Everything she built was unraveling. The inspection team arrived at 9:52 a.m. sharp. 2 unmarked white trucks rolled past the HOA gate like they belonged here. Their plates bore state agency tags. Brinley Stone stepped out first, tall, late 40s, clipboard in hand, reflective vest zipped halfway, hair tied back like she had no interest in small talk. I need access to all pumping infrastructure, she said the moment I introduced myself. Both visible and submerged. If there are private water treatment systems in operation, we'll need their capacity specs and permit documentation. I led her down the east path first, toward Dock B2. The water was low enough now that the siphon intake sat fully exposed, sagging against a support beam. Black sludge ringed the pipe's exit, trailing into the mud like ink bleeding into gauze. Brinley knelt beside it and removed a small glass vial from her case. She scooped a sample. The liquid inside turned murky green before the cap even clicked shut. "That's not lake sediment," she said. "That's processed discharge." Behind us, 2 other inspectors were already photographing the beam, warping and dock plate separations. Another measured the vertical drop from waterline to foundation base. "You said this system was built by the HOA?" she asked. "No," I said. "Built by Nareen Volstrick, HOA president, funded through HOA-approved community enhancement budgets, but leased under her LLC, the Azure Crown Hospitality Group." Her eyes narrowed. "So she's using public dues to maintain a private resort." She wrote the language to make it sound like shared amenity upgrades. Brinley took notes. We moved to the generator hut behind the primary spa platform. The electrical leads were unshielded. The output meters showed signs of recent surge cycling, clear evidence of pump stress. One unit had burned out completely, wires melted against the casing. A maintenance tag on the side was dated 2 days ago. She called over one of her techs. "Test this against code 412 subregs. See if it meets temp discharge thresholds." They stepped away to run the numbers. I remained still, letting the silence of her clipboard fill the air. That's the difference between inspectors and HOA board members. Inspectors don't speak until they're ready to bury you. Across the lake, Nareen's resort lay oddly quiet. No paddleboarders, no deck music. Just workers hauling heavy canvas tarps across the upper spa platform, trying to conceal what was now plain. Half her resort's waterfront structures sat in dead water. Brinley walked to the edge of the resort's beach lounge, knelt again, and tapped a reed-covered basin with her boot. "This whole inlet is artificially deepened," she said. "Shoreline was dug out and filled with compacted substrate. No record of a dredging permit." She stood. "That's a felony in reservoir districts." "I figured as much. I'll need you to file an affidavit. We'll mark this site for emergency violation review." I nodded. "You'll want to speak with a former HOA compliance officer, too. He resigned last week, has copies of all internal communications." She paused. "He has evidence?" "He has her signature on a retroactive permit proposal, never filed, but drafted and time-stamped." Brinley didn't smile, but the corners of her mouth flattened into something that looked like quiet satisfaction. At 11:03 a.m., she placed a call. "This is Inspector Stone, Code 81A. I'm placing Fellmoran Lake under immediate conditional usage hold pending environmental review. Notify the insurance registry. I want all coverage on floating structures suspended until clearance." She hung up and faced me. "You'll need to attend the administrative hearing next week." "I'll be there. You were the one who triggered the drawdown, correct?" I handed her a printed copy of the easement, stamped, signed, notarized. She skimmed it, nodded. "This document saved the lake," she said. "No," I said. "It just gave it time to show its wounds." She tucked it into her folder. "You understand this won't just affect the HOA. Once the insurance carriers are alerted, banks tied to the Azure Crown's financing will receive automatic notifications. This is going to move fast." "I know," I said. I watched her team pack up their samples and equipment. The trucks pulled out one by one. Brinley gave me a final look before she followed them. "You might want to prepare for backlash. It already started when they broke my bridge." As the vehicles disappeared into the trees, I looked back at the shrinking lake, its muddy bones finely visible. Let them try to spin it now. By the next morning, the HOA message board lit up like a wildfire. 3 posts were pulled down before noon. 5 more replaced them, residents asking why the docks were cordoned off, why their paddle access was closed, why the community spa had been taped in yellow plastic by state officials. Then the insurance letters began arriving, suspension notices, policy holds, inspection-triggered underwriting reviews. One by one, the homeowners who had bought into Nareen's waterfront privilege began realizing that everything they were promised was now tied to a sinking, poisoned resort under active state violation review. I didn't have to say a word. The lake did the talking. But at 4:15 p.m., Noreen came to me anyway. She pulled up in that polished white SUV like the world hadn't changed around her, stilettos clicking over gravel, phone in one hand, folder in the other. She stopped at the base of my steps. "You," she said. No greeting, no smile, just venom. I leaned against the porch rail, watching her like you'd watch a dying fire. Still dangerous, but too late to burn anything that mattered. "I've filed an emergency injunction," she snapped. "That easement doesn't grant you authority to weaponize the sluice. It's a conservation clause, not a license to destroy infrastructure." "Then the hearing will sort it out," I said. "You think this is some kind of victory?" "No," I said. "I think this is what happens when you build something dirty on water that was meant to stay clean." She laughed, sharp, brittle. "Your little stunt has put the entire HOA under financial review. Property values are diving. The board is in chaos. That's not a stunt. That's consequence." She stepped closer. "You could have come to me. We could have resolved this quietly." "You came to me with a citation while my wife's bridge was still floating in pieces," I said. "You wrote a violation over a memorial. You ordered lilies uprooted that were planted by a woman dying of cancer. And now you want quiet?" Her face twitched. "I didn't know that," she muttered. "You didn't ask." The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was strained, sharp, the kind of silence that breaks when the last mask falls. She looked at the lake. "You think you've ruined me?" I shook my head. "I didn't ruin you, Noreen. I revealed you. The lake did the rest." She stared at me for another long moment. Then she turned, tossed the folder onto my porch, and walked back to her SUV. I let her go. I waited until the engine faded into the trees before opening the folder. Inside, a printout of her legal motion, a cease and desist order aimed at unauthorized hydrological manipulation, and a personal letter with her signature at the bottom. A warning, a threat, a plea. All three stitched together like a woman trying to write her way out of drowning. I scanned it, filed it, and emailed a copy to Inspector Stone. That night, I received 2 more emails. The first was from the Department of Environmental Quality, an official report confirming the presence of hazardous materials in discharge from the Azure Crown secondary pump station. Review escalation pending. The second came from Sarah Hinckley. Reviewed footage and water logs. We're pulling land disturbance permits. Expect full review of all post-2021 resort structures. Thank you for speaking up when others didn't. It didn't feel like a win. It felt like breath after near drowning. That evening, I walked down to the ruined stretch of Lily Shore. The water had dropped so low the old stone markers, the ones Sarah and I carved to track the tide, were visible for the first time in years. I knelt beside the one marked Day 27, where we'd once placed a flat stone for our anniversary. It was still there, faded, cracked, but there. I pressed my hand to the cool granite. "I told you I'd protect it," I whispered. Behind me, the lake was quiet. And for the first time in weeks, it was honest again. The emergency HOA meeting was called for Saturday at noon. The timing wasn't a coincidence. It was the hour Noreen usually reserved for her community champagne brunches on the Azure Crown deck. But this time, the folding chairs weren't arranged under white canopies and soft music. They were packed tight in the community hall, where the air smelled of old carpet and the walls still had faded photos of the lake before it was monetized. I arrived early and sat near the back. I didn't need a front row. They needed to look each other in the eyes, not me. The room filled fast. Dozens of residents showed up, including faces I hadn't seen in years. Retirees, couples, even renters now facing new occupancy limits after the insurance fallout. The hum of low conversation was undercut by a current of something colder, uncertainty, betrayal, anger that had been simmering under the surface, and now, with the waterline dropped, had nowhere left to hide. At 12:03, Noreen entered. She walked in alone, hair tied back, phone in hand, folder clutched like a shield. Her eyes scanned the room with that same practiced grace she'd used during fundraisers and development pitches. But it didn't land this time. Too many people looked away. Too few smiled. Tom Rinder, the acting vice president after Draven's resignation, stood beside the podium. His voice trembled slightly when he opened the meeting. Due to the recent environmental inspection and temporary policy suspensions, the board has convened this emergency session to discuss leadership status and community redress. Translation: Noreen was about to be challenged. and this time, no procedural jargon would save her. She took the mic anyway. "This campaign to smear my name," she began, "has been built on misinterpretations and manipulated optics. I've served this board with transparency and forward-thinking vision since the day I was elected. The Azure Crown was designed to elevate our neighborhood's value, not devalue it." A hand went up. Lorna Geiss. She didn't wait to be called on. "Why is my homeowner's policy canceled because of your unlicensed pipes?" Noreen blinked. "The DEQ has not officially ruled." "They have," said Nathan Truax, rising beside his wife. "I got the email. They flagged your outtake systems as illegal infrastructure. That's what voided our water risk riders." "This isn't about personal attack. This is about accountability," said Tom gently, "and the board's obligation to honor the environmental and financial interests of every member." Noreen turned toward him, voice sharp. "I kept this community solvent when half the houses were underwater in the last recession. I brought in the funding, the attention, the growth." "Growth isn't always the same thing as stability," Tom said quietly. Then he looked at me. "Mr. Ellerick," he said, "would you like to speak?" I stood slowly, not because I needed to be dramatic, but because my knees were still sore from 3 days of climbing in and out of the dam shaft. I stepped to the center of the room. "I never wanted this," I said. "Not the drama, not the meetings, not the subpoenas or investigations. I moved here with one goal: peace. I had a wife who loved this lake. She planted lilies by hand, built a bridge with me from cedar we cut ourselves, and died before she could see it bloom." The room quieted. Even Noreen was still now. I didn't go after Noreen because I hate her. I exposed what was already rotting underneath this board. You can't pump poison into a lake and call it a legacy. You can't bulldoze memory and call it continuity. And you can't expect silence when the water itself begins to speak. I stepped back. There was no applause, just a stillness that felt earned. Tom cleared his throat. "Motion to suspend Noreen Volstrick from her role pending full audit completion." The hands went up, one by one, steady, reluctant, some shaking, but they rose. Only 2 hands stayed down. Noreen stood frozen, the folder still clutched to her chest, her face unreadable. Tom nodded. "Motion carries, effective immediately." She didn't protest, she didn't argue. She just turned, walked out the side door, and disappeared. And just like that, the tide turned. The morning after the meeting, the lake was quiet again. Not the strained silence of denial, but the real kind, the kind that lives in balance. The pumps were still, the air smelled clean, the reflection of the ridge rippled the way it used to before the resort lights scattered across the surface. I stood on the shoreline, with a hammer in hand and a plank resting across 2 sawhorses. The wood was reclaimed, pieces of the old bridge I'd salvaged after the collision. Some were splintered beyond repair, but others still held strength under their scars. I ran my hand across the grain. It felt alive again. Draven arrived first. He parked quietly, bringing a toolbox under one arm and 2 coffees in the other. He didn't speak, just nodded, set the box down, and started measuring. Then the Truaxes came, followed by the Geisses. Even Lorna, leaning on a cane, carried a roll of weather-treated rope she said she found in her garage. By mid-morning, half the neighborhood stood at the edge of Fellmoran Lake, sleeves rolled up, knees muddy, rebuilding what greed tried to erase. No speeches, no cameras, just wood, bolts, rope, and time. Every plank that went down felt like a pulse returning to something that had been flatlined for too long. When the final beam settled into place, the water lapped gently against it, almost like it recognized the sound. I named it again, Sarah's Span. Someone asked if I planned to paint it this time. I shook my head. No, it earned the right to be what it is. Draven handed me a small brass plate, newly etched with fresh lettering. Sarah's Span, restored 2025. Below it, in smaller text, built for balance, protected by truth. We mounted it to the beam together. The sun broke through just then, and the light struck the metal so perfectly it flashed like a signal across the water. I thought about Noreen, about her SUV vanishing down the road that day, the silence she left behind. The resort was closed now, officially under remediation. Investors pulled out. The state held her licenses pending full investigation. She wasn't in jail, not yet. But her reputation was. And sometimes that's the heavier sentence. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived in my mailbox from the County Department of Environmental Quality. It was short, bureaucratic, impersonal. But the last line meant everything. Your documentation directly prevented further contamination of Fellmoran Reservoir. This community owes you restoration, not retribution. I folded it carefully and slipped it inside my wife's old gardening journal, the one she used to press flowers in. It didn't belong in a frame. It belonged next to the memory it protected. By dusk, the lake started refilling, slow and steady, like it was forgiving us in its own language. The first frogs returned to the shallows. Birds traced low arcs over the waterline. Even the lilies were sprouting again, small and defiant against the softened mud. I sat on the new bridge's edge with my boots dangling just above the surface, the reflection of the sky deepening into gold and copper. Draven stood behind me, arms crossed, looking at what we built. "You think it'll hold?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "It'll hold better than the last version. Because we use stronger wood?" "No," I said. "Because this time, everyone who touches it knows what it cost." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We stayed there in silence, watching the light fade across the water, the same way Sarah and I used to when this place was just a home, not a battlefield. A breeze rolled through. The brass plate gleamed once, catching the last trace of sun before slipping into shadow. And for the first time in months, the sound that followed wasn't noise, wasn't chaos, just the soft hum of a lake breathing freely again. I thought of how quiet justice really is. It doesn't need an audience. It just needs proof. The water took care of the rest. Subscribe, and trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?